Let's now talk about some of argumentation theories which has been proposed quite recently in order to provide some models for argumentation and in order to deal with multiple aspects of our contemporary world. One of the influential models come from Stephen Tolman, who was a British philosopher. He first presented his model of argumentation in his book The Uses of Argumentation, The Uses of Argument, which was published in 1958. Tolman saw his model more useful for describing various ways of argumentation in our daily conversations. Rather, he himself calls it more suitable for the description of reasonable procedures of everyday argumentation. How in our common life, in our daily life, we develop arguments, and how this kind of arguments can be categorized for their better understanding, and further, how they could be used for understanding other spheres of our life. Moreover, he assumes that the categories of his model are field independent. They are not reduced to a certain field of action only. Still, however, he believed that some aspects of his model would be field dependent. For example, some instances of argumentation he presented belong to various fields, for example, law, business, politics. The 6 categories in Tolman's model are functionally motivated. They were based on various kinds of functions which are used in functions of argumentation which are used in our daily lives. Tolman's model has been widely used for the analysis of the structure of everyday arguments, and still it is a very dominant model in our contemporary argumentation theory. Then we have another prominent name, a Canadian philosopher, Douglas Walton, who revolutionized the study of fallacies. Fallacies, we know, are found in traditional logic also. How certain arguments are raised on somehow beguiled kinds of arguments who apparently look fine, but in fact they are based on wrong logic or wrong arguments. So a fallacy is something which apparently looks fine, but when we look deep about it, it looks logically wrong or false. Walton has developed a new dialectic which analyzes and evaluates arguments according to their goals also in different types of arguments. For example, negotiation, which is a joint effort to reach some kind of deal in order to maximize one's benefits and to find a compromise. We also have Aristic Dialogue, which is a kind of verbal fight and is based on where all participants try to win and release powerful emotions and try to convince their audience. So there are various kinds of dialogues which may be judged based on their arguments and the goals of those arguments and dialogues overall. Walton suggests that traditional list of fallacies are better viewed as weak but not necessarily fallacious arguments. He considers that they are not absolutely wrong or something which should be completely shunned. Rather, this could be seen as a weak argument which probably may shift the burden of proof in the absence of strong or powerful arguments. Walton considers such arguments as instances of presumptive arguments or reasoning instead of completely rejecting them. From 1984 onwards, we see the Dutch linguists Frans Ammeren and Rob Gutendost, they developed the framework for pragma dialectics, and this can be called one of the most comprehensive models or research program within the contemporary argumentation theory, which develops new ways of looking into various kinds of arguments. Pragma dialects combines the study of speech acts, which are also a part of our linguistic discipline, and coming from pragmatics, and also it combines it with the occurrence of argumentative discussions, with insights from normative dialectic, something which is based on norms. A reconciliation of normative and empirical approaches to the study of argumentation has actually been its general goal from its very beginning. In order to achieve the multiple goals of argumentative or argumentation studies, Van Emeren and his counterpart developed 5 estates of research. And these, in the philosophical estate, they believe that the concept of reasonableness should be defined clearly, because it becomes very fuzzy or unclear sometimes. Something which is reasonable to one person may not be reasonable to another. So there should be some kind of theory which clearly articulates the concept of reasonableness. In the theoretical estate, a theory is derived from the philosophical premises, as we all know, and they believe that in case of pragma dialectics, the theory regards each argumentation as a critical discussion between parties, and through this discussion some kind of conclusion may be drawn, who try to resolve a difference of opinion by testing the acceptability of the standpoints concerned, standpoints conveyed by the parties involved. In the analytical state, they believe that the systematic application of reconstruction transformations can be useful. For example, deletion, the strategies of deletion, addition, substitution, permutation. They can also help to reconstruct argumentative structure of a given text by deleting speech acts which are not relevant for the resolution of a conflict or opinion. They can help us to delete arguments which might convey, which might create some kind of confusion and would not enable us to reach to a certain conclusion. Similarly, they might encourage us to add some relevant material that has been not put in clearly, rather left implicit. So, and we assume that adding such material can help us understand the deep meaning. This could be a stylistic variation, for example, presenting an argument in a plain manner. Instead of doing that, we can present an argument in form of rhetorical questions. Such addition can be helpful in some situations or at some stages of the argument. In the empirical state, qualitative research has been carried out in order to show how argumentative moves. The expression of, for example, the expression of standpoints, arguments and doubts, and argument structure. For example, simple or complex argumentation can be reconstructed on the basis of different types of argument indicators, and in this way, this empirical state can help us to look at the structure of various kinds of arguments. And then in practical state, these pragma dialectic experts try to enhance argumentative competence by furthering reflection about argumentation, by making its results accessible to a wider public. Instead of keeping it as an elite academic discipline or subject, it was argued that this should reach to wider public, which probably would understand it and would try to find something relevant for themselves, and would also point out something which may be misleading based on their feedback. Within the last few years, pragma dialectics has been extended by Van Emeren and Peter Hautlosser. These have Emeren has also introduced an important concept of strategic maneuvering. That is that there has to be continual efforts made in all moves that are carried out in argumentative discourse to keep the balance between reasonableness and effectiveness. Whenever we are working with some kind of argumentation theory, we need to find some kind of balance between reasonableness. What is reasonable? Is that effective or not? And something which is effective, is that reasonable or not? In an ideal argumentation theory, I think there should clearly be a balance between reasonableness and effectiveness. Something which we think reasonable should also be effective, effective in a way that it should reach to the audience with the same effect we want to create as a speaker. So argumentation, a good argumentation might include a balance of both these factors, naming effectiveness and reasonableness.